My fiancé didn't notice I was crying at our engagement party until a stranger asked if I was okay. Then he finally looked at me. My fiancé Trevor spent 3 months planning our engagement party down to every last detail, from the color-coordinated napkins to the custom cocktails named after us. What he didn't plan for was actually spending time with me during the event, which became painfully clear about 20 minutes after guests started arriving at the upscale restaurant he'd rented out for the evening. I stood near the entrance greeting people I barely knew while Trevor worked the room like he was running for office, shaking hands and telling the proposal story to anyone who would listen. His version was polished and romantic, complete with perfectly timed pauses for laughter, but it left out the part where I'd had to prompt him twice to actually say the words because he kept talking about the ring's clarity rating instead. Every time I tried to catch his eye across the room, he was deep in conversation with someone from his law firm or his college buddies, gesturing enthusiastically with his champagne glass and never once glancing in my direction. His mother, Constance, swooped in after about 30 minutes, air kissing both my cheeks while holding her phone at arm's length to capture the moment for her social media followers. "Darling, you look lovely, though I do wish you'd gone with the Vera Wang dress I sent you the link for," she said, adjusting the neckline of my dress without asking permission. "This is a bit too simple for such an important occasion, don't you think?" Before I could respond, she was already pulling me toward a group of her country club friends, introducing me as Trevor's fiancé, while somehow making it sound like a temporary position I was auditioning for, rather than a commitment we'd both made. The women asked polite questions about wedding plans, and I tried to answer enthusiastically, even though Trevor and I hadn't actually discussed any details beyond agreeing we should probably get married sometime next year. "We're thinking maybe a spring wedding," I offered, and Constance immediately corrected me with a patronizing laugh. "Oh no, dear. Spring is far too soon. We'll need at least 18 months to plan something appropriate for the family, probably a fall wedding in 2 years. She turned to her friends and stage whispered, "She's still learning how these things work." I excused myself to get another drink, fighting the tightness in my throat that always appeared when Constance talked about me like I was a particularly slow student in a class she was forced to teach. At the bar, Trevor's college roommate Nathan ordered shots for himself and his girlfriend while barely acknowledging my presence, even though we'd met at least 5 times before. His girlfriend Melissa gave me a sympathetic smile that suggested she knew exactly how invisible I felt, but wasn't sure how to help. I ordered a wine I didn't really want and turned to scan the room for Trevor, finally spotting him in the corner with his arm around his best man Christopher, both of them laughing at something on Christopher's phone. The bartender set down my wine with a concerned expression, probably because I was gripping the edge of the bar hard enough that my knuckles had gone white. I paid for the drink I wouldn't finish and made my way to the bathroom, needing just 5 minutes away from the performance of being the happy bride-to-be. The bathroom was one of those fancy restaurant ones with actual furniture and soft lighting, designed to make you forget you were in a room meant for bodily functions. I sat on the velvet ottoman in the corner and finally let myself acknowledge what had been building all evening. This party wasn't about us or our relationship or celebrating a future together. It was about Trevor showing off for his parents and his colleagues, proving he'd successfully checked another box on the path to partnership at his firm. The engagement itself had felt the same way, executed at the exact restaurant where his parents had gotten engaged, with his whole family coincidentally present because his mother had insisted on planning a birthday dinner for his father on the same night. I should have seen the pattern then, but I'd convinced myself I was being too sensitive, that this was just how his family operated. I'd been crying for maybe 2 minutes, trying to do it quietly so no one would hear, when someone knocked softly on the bathroom door. "Occupied?" I called out, my voice cracking on the word. "I know," said a woman's voice from the other side. "I saw you come in here looking upset and I wanted to make sure you're okay. I'm Freya. I'm here with the Carmichael party. Probably crashed your event, honestly." I opened the door to find a woman about my age with kind eyes and an outfit that suggested she'd dressed for a much more casual gathering than the formal affair happening in the main dining room. She held up her hands in a gesture of peace and said, "I know this is weird, but I've been watching you all night and you look like you need a friend right now." Something about her directness made the tears come faster, and before I could stop myself, I was telling this complete stranger everything. How Trevor had proposed in front of his entire family before I'd even said yes, assuming my answer and leaving me no real choice but to go along with it. How we'd been together for 3 years, but I still felt like I was auditioning for a role in his life, rather than building a life together. How his mother had opinions about everything from my career to my hair to my choice of friends, and Trevor never once stood up for me or suggested his mother might be overstepping. Freya listened without interrupting, occasionally handing me tissues from her purse, and when I finally ran out of words, she said something I desperately needed to hear. "That sounds exhausting, and you don't sound like someone who's excited to marry this man." The truth of it hit me so hard I had to sit back down on the ottoman. Freya sat next to me and continued gently, "I don't know you or your fiancé, so maybe I'm completely wrong here. But from what I've seen tonight, you've been standing alone or with his mother for over an hour while he networks with everyone except you. And now you're crying in the bathroom at your own engagement party while he hasn't even noticed you're gone." She paused and looked at me seriously. "Is this really what you want for the rest of your life? Because marriage doesn't fix these problems, it just makes them permanent." I wanted to defend Trevor, to explain all the good qualities that had made me fall for him in the first place, but sitting there trying to think of examples, I realized most of my positive memories were from our first 6 months together, before his family had really gotten involved in our relationship. "He used to be different," I said weakly, and Freya nodded like she'd heard this before. "They usually are in the beginning. But the question isn't who he was, it's who he is now, and who he's going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Does that person seem like someone who will see you and hear you and make you feel valued?" Before I could answer, someone pounded on the bathroom door and Trevor's voice came through, sharp with irritation. "Babe, people are asking where you are. We need to do the toast thing." Not asking if I was okay or why I'd been gone for 20 minutes, just annoyed that I wasn't where I was supposed to be for his schedule. Freya raised her eyebrows and mouthed, "Really?" before standing up and opening the door before I could stop her. Trevor stood there looking annoyed until he saw my face, clearly tear-stained despite my attempts to clean up, and his expression shifted to confusion. "Why are you crying? Did something happen?" Freya looked at him with barely concealed disdain and said, "Your fiancé has been in here upset for 20 minutes and you just now came looking for her because you need her for a toast. Does that seem okay to you?" Trevor's face went red and he looked between Freya and me like he was trying to understand how this stranger knew anything about our relationship. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice taking on that aggressive edge it got when he felt challenged. Freya smiled without warmth and said, "I'm nobody, just someone who noticed your fiancé was crying while you were too busy networking to care." Trevor grabbed my arm and pulled me out of the bathroom, muttering apologies to Freya that sounded more angry than sorry. "What were you thinking? Telling some random woman about our private business?" he hissed as he dragged me back toward the main party. "Do you know how that looks? My mother is going to have questions if people saw you crying, not asking why I'd been crying or what was wrong, just worried about how it appeared to others." We reached the main room where his father was tapping a knife against a champagne glass to get everyone's attention, ready to deliver the toast Trevor had probably written for him. I stood next to Trevor with his arm around my waist in a possessive grip that was just shy of painful, and I forced a smile while his father talked about family legacy and the importance of finding the right partner to build a life with. The irony of those words wasn't lost on me as I stood there with a man who'd only noticed I was missing because it interrupted his schedule. Trevor's father finished his toast and everyone clapped while Trevor kissed my temple in a display of affection that felt completely performative. "There's my girl," he said loudly enough for nearby people to hear. "I was wondering where you'd disappeared to." His mother appeared at my other side and leaned in close enough that only Trevor and I could hear her. "I heard from Melissa that you were seen going into the bathroom with some woman from another party. I hope you weren't making a scene, dear. These are Trevor's colleagues and they talk." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. The automatic assumption that if something went wrong, it must be my fault. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and polite conversations with people who seemed much more interested in Trevor's career trajectory than in anything about me or our relationship. Every time someone asked about wedding plans, Trevor would launch into vague generalities about wanting something elegant and appropriate, while his mother nodded approvingly, and I would stand there silent because apparently my opinions on my own wedding were less important than maintaining his family's image. Around 10 o'clock, guests started leaving, and Trevor finally relaxed enough to actually look at me properly for the first time all evening. "That went really well," he said with satisfaction. Christopher said the partner from his firm was really impressed with the event, might help with my promotion chances. I stared at him and realized I'd been looking at our relationship wrong this entire time. I'd thought we were building something together, but to Trevor, I was just another element of the life he was constructing to impress his parents and his colleagues. The engagement party hadn't been about celebrating our love or our future. It had been a networking event where I was a prop. "Trevor, did you notice I was crying tonight?" I asked quietly. He looked confused by the question. "What? No. When were you crying? Was it when you were in the bathroom? I thought you were just fixing your makeup." The casual way he dismissed my pain, like it was some minor cosmetic issue rather than a symptom of deeper problems, finally crystallized something I'd been avoiding for months. "I was in that bathroom for over 20 minutes crying hard enough that a complete stranger came to check on me," I said, hearing my voice get stronger as I continued. "And you didn't notice I was gone until you needed me for a photo opportunity with your parents." Trevor's expression shifted from confusion to defensive irritation. "That's not fair. I was hosting a party with 100 guests. I can't be expected to track your location every second. And maybe if you'd told me you were upset instead of hiding in the bathroom, I could have done something about it." The instinct to apologize and smooth things over was almost overwhelming, but Freya's words echoed in my head. "Is this really what you want for the rest of your life?" I took off the engagement ring, that massive diamond Trevor had spent months selecting because it would photograph well and impress his mother, and held it out to him. "I can't do this," I said, and watched his face cycle through disbelief, anger, and finally calculation as he glanced around to see if anyone was watching. "You're breaking up with me at our engagement party?" he hissed, grabbing my wrist but not taking the ring. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? My parents paid for this entire event. The fact that his first concern was embarrassment rather than losing me told me everything I needed to know." "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it in a way I hadn't meant my apologies to him in months, "but I can't marry someone who doesn't notice when I'm falling apart right in front of them." His mother materialized beside us with the supernatural timing she'd perfected over years of managing her son's image. "Is there a problem?" she asked in that deceptively calm voice she used before destroying someone. Trevor showed her the ring I was still holding and said, "She's making a scene," not explaining the situation or expressing any emotion, just framing it as me causing trouble again. Constance looked at me with cold fury and said, "I knew you weren't ready for this family. Trevor, darling, why don't you go finish saying goodbye to the guests while I handle this?" She took my elbow in a grip that looked gentle but hurt, steering me toward a quiet corner of the restaurant. "I don't know what kind of stunt you think you're pulling," she said quietly, "but you will not humiliate my son in front of his colleagues and our friends. You will put that ring back on, smile for the rest of the evening, and if you still want to end things, you'll wait until a reasonable amount of time has passed and do it privately with a story we can all agree on." The sheer audacity of it. The assumption that her son's reputation was more important than my actual feelings or well-being gave me a clarity I'd been lacking all evening. "No," I said simply, and watched her face register shock that I'd refused her. "I'm leaving now, and Trevor can explain it however he wants. I don't care anymore." I walked past her toward the exit, still holding the ring because Trevor hadn't actually taken it back. Freya was standing near the door talking to her friends, and she caught my eye, giving me a subtle thumbs up that made me want to cry again, but in a different way. Outside the restaurant, the night air felt impossibly fresh after hours in that suffocating space. I stood on the sidewalk trying to decide where to go since Trevor and I lived together, and I definitely wasn't going back to our apartment tonight. My phone buzzed with texts from Trevor alternating between anger and attempts at manipulation. "You're being completely irrational," followed by, "I love you, please don't do this," followed by, "My mother is right, you're not mature enough for this commitment." I was about to call my best friend Laura when Freya appeared next to me on the sidewalk. "Hey," she said gently, "I don't want to overstep, but my place is like 10 minutes from here if you need somewhere to crash tonight. My roommate makes really good tea and we're both excellent at trash-talking terrible men." I started crying again, overwhelmed by the kindness of this stranger who'd shown me more genuine care in one evening than my fiancé had in months. "You don't even know me," I said through tears. "Why would you do this?" Freya shrugged and smiled. "Because I've been where you are, trying to convince myself that a relationship was working when every sign pointed to the opposite. Someone helped me get out and I'm just paying it forward. Plus, anyone who makes you cry that hard at your own engagement party doesn't deserve you." I followed her to her apartment where her roommate Isla immediately made tea without asking questions, and the three of us sat in their living room while I told them the full story of my relationship with Trevor and his family. The next morning, I woke up on Freya's couch to 17 missed calls from Trevor and a dozen texts from his mother, each one more threatening than the last about legal action and reputation damage. There were also messages from mutual friends who'd apparently heard his version of events, several of them expressing disappointment that I'd caused a scene and embarrassed Trevor. Only Laura's messages were supportive, offering to help me move my stuff out of Trevor's apartment and threatening to key his car if I wanted her to. I spent that morning creating a plan. I'd go to the apartment while Trevor was at work, pack my essential belongings, and stay with Laura until I figured out my next move. Freya offered to come with me for moral support and safety, which I accepted gratefully because I wasn't entirely sure how Trevor would react. When we got to the apartment, I expected it to be empty but found Constance waiting there instead, sitting on the couch like she owned the place. "I convinced Trevor to let me talk to you first," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I think we can work this out if you're willing to be reasonable." She proceeded to outline her plan. I would apologize publicly for the misunderstanding. We would reset the engagement with a smaller, more private ceremony, and in return she would help me find a more suitable career since my current job as a graphic designer was not quite appropriate for the family. The absolute gall of thinking she could negotiate my life like a business transaction made me want to laugh and scream simultaneously. "I'm not interested in your plan," I said, moving past her toward the bedroom to pack. She followed me, her voice getting sharper as her false kindness evaporated. "You're making a huge mistake. Trevor is a catch. Any woman would be lucky to marry him. You're throwing away security and status because you're too immature to handle a little family input." I stopped packing and turned to face her. "Your son didn't notice I was crying at our engagement party until a stranger pointed it out. He didn't comfort me. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just worried about how it looked to his colleagues. That's not love. That's not even basic human decency. It's treating me like an accessory to his life rather than a partner in it." Constance's mask dropped completely and her face twisted with rage. "You ungrateful little nobody. My son gave you a chance at a life you could never have achieved on your own, and this is how you repay him? By humiliating him in front of everyone who matters?" The classism that had always been lurking under her polite exterior was now fully on display, and I realized she'd never seen me as good enough for Trevor. Had probably been hoping I'd mess up so she could convince him to trade up. "I'm sorry you wasted money on the engagement party," I said, meaning none of it. "But I'd rather be a nobody who respects herself than someone's accessory who cries in bathrooms while nobody notices." I finished packing my 2 suitcases while Constance called Trevor to report my hostile behavior, and Freya helped me carry everything down to Laura's car that had just pulled up outside. The aftermath was messy in ways I hadn't anticipated. Trevor's friends and family launched a campaign on social media about my instability and Trevor's heartbreak, painting me as someone who'd led him on and then cruelly dumped him without warning. Several mutual friends chose his side, which hurt more than I'd expected, but Laura remained fiercely loyal and helped me block everyone who was spreading his narrative. The hardest part was untangling our shared life. The apartment lease we'd signed together, the joint bank account his mother had insisted we open, the social circles that were mostly his friends and colleagues. I lost my favorite coffee shop because his coworkers went there every morning, lost my gym because his mother had gotten me a membership at her club, lost entire parts of my routine that had become intertwined with his life. My own family was supportive but confused, especially my mother who'd been excited about the wedding and couldn't understand why I'd throw away such a good match. Explaining that being ignored and dismissed wasn't actually a good match proved harder than I'd expected, especially when Trevor's public version of events made him look like the victim. 2 weeks after the broken engagement, I got a package delivered to Laura's apartment where I was still crashing. Inside was the engagement ring with a note from Trevor's lawyer about the return policy and how I was legally obligated to give it back since the engagement had ended. No personal message, no acknowledgement of our 3 years together, just a legal demand for property return. I mailed it back the same day with no note of my own because there was nothing left to say. A month later, I was building a new life that felt scary and uncertain, but unmistakably mine. I'd gotten a freelance design contract that paid better than my old job, found an apartment I could afford on my own, and started therapy to unpack why I'd stayed so long in a relationship that made me feel invisible. Freya and Isla had become genuine friends, the kind who checked in regularly and celebrated small victories like my first night in my new apartment or landing a difficult client. Laura threw me a divorce party, even though we'd never actually married, complete with a cake that said, "Dodge that bullet" in frosting. The turning point came when I ran into Christopher, Trevor's best man, at a bookstore downtown. He looked uncomfortable when he saw me but approached anyway, asking how I was doing with what seemed like genuine concern. "Trevor's been really struggling," he said, and I prepared myself for another guilt trip. His mom keeps setting him up on dates, but he's not interested. I think he's finally realizing what he lost. I waited for the familiar urge to comfort him, to take responsibility for his pain, but felt nothing except relief that I wasn't there to fix it. "I hope he figures it out," I said honestly, "but that's not my problem anymore." Christopher nodded slowly and said something that surprised me. "For what it's worth, I thought you were too good for him. His priorities have always been messed up, and his mom doesn't help. I probably should have said something before, but it's hard to criticize your best friend's relationship, you know?" 6 months after the broken engagement, I saw Trevor's new relationship announcement on social media before I remembered to block him. He was dating someone who looked eerily similar to me but younger, and the photos showed her with his family at various events, always smiling but with that same tight quality around her eyes that I recognized from my own pictures with them. Constance had commented on every post about how perfect the new girlfriend was, how well she fit with the family, how excited they all were about this relationship. I felt a pang of sympathy for this woman who had no idea what she was walking into, how many years she might waste trying to earn approval that would never fully come. I briefly considered warning her but decided against it. She'd have to learn those lessons on her own like I had. The real gift Freya had given me that night wasn't just checking on me in the bathroom or offering her couch. It was asking the question I'd been avoiding. Is this really what you want for the rest of your life? That question had lodged in my brain and forced me to be honest about the answer, even when the truth was uncomfortable and scary. I'd spent 3 years convincing myself that Trevor's inattention was just his personality, that his mother's criticism was just her trying to help, that feeling invisible was the price of being with someone ambitious and successful. Freya had seen through all those rationalizations in 20 minutes because she was looking at the situation without the sunk cost fallacy that had kept me trapped. A year after the engagement party, I was thriving in ways I couldn't have imagined. My freelance business had grown enough that I'd hired an assistant. I'd started dating someone who noticed when I was upset before I had to tell them, and I'd reconnected with old friends I'd drifted from during my relationship with Trevor. The apartment I'd been terrified to afford on my own had become my sanctuary, decorated exactly how I wanted without anyone's input about what was appropriate for the family. I ran into Freya at a coffee shop and she barely recognized me at first because I looked so different, happier and more confident than the crying woman she'd comforted in that bathroom. We caught up over lattes and she told me she'd just gotten engaged herself to someone who sounded completely different from Trevor, someone who prioritized her feelings and noticed when she needed support. "I almost didn't go to that restaurant that night," she admitted. "My friends wanted to go somewhere else, but I insisted because I'd heard the food was good." Funny how things work out. I thanked her again for what she'd done and she waved it off like it was nothing, but we both knew it was everything. One stranger's willingness to ask if I was okay had changed the trajectory of my entire life. The engagement party had been exactly what I needed, just not in the way anyone expected. It had been the catalyst that finally made me see my relationship clearly, stripped of all the justifications and excuses I'd built up over 3 years. Looking back now, the clearest sign should have been that moment in the bathroom when Freya opened the door, and Trevor's first question wasn't about my well-being, but about where I'd been for his toast. That single interaction had contained everything wrong with our relationship in miniature. His priorities, his obliviousness, his irritation at me disrupting his plans. I'd ignored so many signs before that, convinced myself that love meant accepting someone's flaws and working through differences. But there's a difference between accepting normal human imperfection and accepting being treated like you don't matter. Trevor hadn't been a terrible person in obvious ways. He'd never hit me or cheated on me or done anything that would make people understand why I left. The damage had been quieter and more insidious, a slow erosion of my sense of self through constant dismissal and deprioritization. His mother's involvement had accelerated the process, but the foundation had been there from the beginning. Trevor saw me as a supporting character in his life story, rather than the co-author of our shared story. The most valuable thing I'd learned was to trust that feeling of wrongness when something wasn't right, even when everyone around me insisted it was fine. All those times I'd felt invisible or dismissed or like I was overreacting, my instincts had been correct. I'd just been trained to doubt them, to prioritize other people's comfort over my own reality. Breaking that pattern had been terrifying but necessary, and I was still learning to trust myself fully again. My current partner Graham noticed everything about me in ways that would have seemed overwhelming if I hadn't experienced the opposite extreme with Trevor. He remembered my coffee order without being told, noticed when I was stressed before I mentioned it, asked about my day, and actually listened to the answers. The first time he threw me a birthday party, he invited my friends instead of his, planned activities I enjoyed instead of what would impress others, and spent the evening checking in with me to make sure I was having fun. The contrast was so stark it made me realize how much I'd normalized dysfunction with Trevor. These weren't grand romantic gestures. They were basic indicators of someone who saw me as a full person worthy of attention and care. Graham had met Freya at a dinner party I'd hosted, and they'd bonded over their shared role in helping me escape that relationship, joking about forming a support group for people who rescue their friends from terrible situations. The easy way Graham accepted my past without jealousy or judgment was another sign I'd found something healthy this time. When I told him the full story of the engagement party and the bathroom crying, he'd gotten quiet and said, "I'm glad that stranger found you, but I'm sorry you needed a stranger to notice because your fiancé couldn't be bothered." That simple validation of my experience meant more than he probably knew. 2 years after the broken engagement, I received a wedding invitation from Trevor to someone I'd never heard of, not the woman from his social media posts. The invitation was formal and impersonal, clearly sent out of obligation because our social circles still overlapped slightly. I RSVP'd no and threw it away without a second thought, feeling nothing but relief that I wasn't the one marrying into that family. Laura told me later through the grapevine that Trevor's mother had apparently objected to his choice, and the wedding planning was already full of drama and control battles. I felt that same pang of sympathy for his new fiancé that I'd felt for the previous one, but mostly I felt grateful that it wasn't my problem anymore. The strangest part of healing was realizing how many red flags I'd explained away or ignored completely. Trevor's proposal in front of his family before I'd answered, his mother's constant criticism disguised as helpful advice, his prioritization of his career and image over our relationship, his inability to notice or care about my emotional state. Each one had seemed manageable in isolation, but together they'd created a relationship that was slowly suffocating me. I'd been so focused on being a good partner and making the relationship work that I'd forgotten to ask whether the relationship was actually good for me. That question should have been obvious, but somehow it had never occurred to me until Freya asked it in that bathroom. The engagement party had been my rock bottom in some ways, the moment where I couldn't ignore the dysfunction anymore, because it was too visible and too painful. Being invisible to Trevor while surrounded by 100 people celebrating our future together had forced me to confront the reality I'd been avoiding. This was what marriage to him would look like. More parties where I stood alone while he networked, more family events where his mother criticized and controlled, more nights crying in bathrooms while he remained oblivious to my pain. The future had suddenly become clear and unbearable, and Freya's intervention had given me permission to acknowledge that and act on it. I sometimes wondered what would have happened if she hadn't come to check on me, if I'd just wiped my tears and gone back out to finish the party. Would I have eventually found the courage to leave, or would I have convinced myself to go through with the wedding? The question was unanswerable but haunting, a reminder of how close I'd come to permanently cementing a mistake. These days when I'm at parties or events with Graham, I sometimes see other women standing alone looking lost or upset while their partners socialize without them. I try to check in when I can, offer a kind word or ask if they're okay, paying forward what Freya did for me. Most of them insist they're fine and I don't push, but occasionally someone accepts the lifeline and we end up having conversations that hopefully plant seeds of doubt about situations they've been accepting as normal. 3 years after that engagement party, I'm happier than I've ever been, and building a life that feels authentically mine rather than performed for someone else's approval. The business is thriving, my relationships are healthy, and I've learned to trust my instincts when something feels wrong. I still think about that night sometimes, about crying in that bathroom while my fiancé remained oblivious outside. But instead of feeling sad about the time I wasted with Trevor, I feel grateful for the clear signal the universe sent me about what I didn't want. That stranger's simple question, "Are you okay?" had changed everything because it forced me to answer honestly, first to her and then to myself. And the answer had been no. I wasn't okay, and I hadn't been okay for a long time. Acknowledging that truth had been terrifying but necessary, the first step toward building something better. If I could go back and tell my past self anything, it would be to trust that feeling of wrongness sooner, to not wait for a dramatic bathroom breakdown to acknowledge that being ignored and dismissed wasn't normal or acceptable. But maybe I needed that moment of clarity, that undeniable proof that something was fundamentally broken. Maybe some lessons can only be learned through painful experience rather than wise advice. Either way, I'm grateful for where that painful experience led me, even though I wouldn't wish the journey on anyone else. The engagement party was supposed to celebrate the beginning of forever with Trevor, but instead it marked the beginning of forever for myself. If you're still here, you're a true fan. Show some support with a like and subscribe to catch the next one.